Hello, everyone. My name is Solome Tibabu. I'm the host of the Expanding Access podcast, and I'm really delighted for this special guest today, Director Wright. It's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Your background is just incredible, and can't wait for the behavioral health tech community to learn more about you. And so before we jump in, if you don't mind just giving a brief background of who you are and your work to kick us off.
My name is Wanda Wright, and currently I am a director of the Office for Veteran and Military Academic Engagement at Arizona State University and an assistant professor. I served in the military for 26 years, active duty for 5, and then active guard for 21. I also had the opportunity to work for our governor in Arizona for 8 years as the director for the Arizona Department of Veteran Services. And so I have a lot to say, actually, I think, about veterans and direct services for veterans, particularly in the behavioral health arena. And so thank you for inviting me to talk today. I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Incredible. And yes, of course, behavioral health tech, we also got our start in Arizona, and I'm here locally as well. So again, such a pleasure to have you. Just to get started, I think our listeners might be surprised to learn that actually a significant percentage of people separating from the military or those becoming veterans are actually women. In fact, I believe last year, the Journal of Community Health published a paper on social determinants of suicide among female veterans in particular and military service members. Help us understand what compelled you to conduct this research.
So I think for myself, being a woman veteran, my experience has been interesting in regards to employment. And I always felt when I transitioned out of the military that people didn't really understand what a woman veteran was, right? Lots of cultural issues with it. I think particularly even now in this administration, why would a woman want to serve? So based on that, when I became the director for the Arizona Department of Veteran Services, I decided that one of my jobs, and I think obligation, was to be an advocate for women veterans. They don't utilize their resources like their male counterparts. And I felt like I needed to be the voice, especially now that I was in this sort of higher position, to talk and speak with women veterans about their benefits and help them understand why it was important for them to take them. Right. And so one of the things I came up against was women often feel like they are not a veteran because they weren't in combat or they only served for a couple of years or whatever reason they might have come up with. And, I don't necessarily think that our male counterparts kind of see it that way when they're trying to get their benefits. So for some reason, we deprecate ourselves as women and don't take advantage of those things. So for 8 years, that was really my mission, was to help women understand what benefits they had that could be afforded to them and really how to enroll and get them. And I think I was pretty successful. I believe that even to this day, after I've left the job a couple of years ago, people recognize me for that and come up to me and say, I remember when you had that women's conference for us, and I just want to thank you for that, because it really made me believe that I was a woman veteran. And I did go back to the VA and get my benefit. I went back and got my health care or whatever they might have gone back to get. And that means that I did my job correctly during that time. And so even today, I still advocate for women veterans. And that paper was one of them, so that we could look at women veterans in Arizona and what social determinants of health are impacting their lives. And generally speaking, nationally, I think women veterans really are on the downside of our ability to get to our benefits, have access to care, and advocating for ourselves. So our rates of suicide, homelessness by population are much higher than our male counterparts. One of the interesting things, though, is that we go to education more than our male counterparts, which I just find that fascinating. And so I think, the paper was written because we wanted to really understand, and I'm just a co-author on it, to really understand what women were dealing with through a survey that we do every 2 years to determine what social determinants of health that they were suffering with.
Oh, it's just so important. And in fact, there is one finding that really stood out. I would love to just read it here. Depression, disability, barriers to treatment, housing instability, feelings of loneliness, and more were associated with increased suicidality among respondents. Substance use within the last 30 days, social support, and veteran social support were not found to be significantly associated with suicidality. I found that just really surprising, and would love to hear from you. What other findings surprised you, or maybe didn't surprise you from this study and your work beyond this research as well?
Yeah, I feel like it doesn't surprise me. What surprises me still is the bias, right? We as women veterans, we go out to the world, we work, we have our kids, we have our families, and go back to school. And there's still a bias out there, even in institutions such as the VA. I was telling a story the other day about how one of our white lady veterans went to the counter and said, we're here for the appointment. And the person looked right past her and said, well, where's your husband? And so that kind of bias doesn't help, right? You want to be seen for who you are and for what you did. We raised our hand just like everybody else and served our nation, which is, an honor and a privilege for all of us. And so to be sort of disrespected like that because you have a bias is just, I think, in my mind, we should be past that. We're at a time in our history where women have equal rights and should be acknowledged for whatever work they're doing. But I'll give you another instance of bias. We are working on a project called the Veteran Suicide Mortality Review. And in that review, we are looking at cases of veterans who have passed away by suicide. And in those records, we review them and we try to figure out how accurate were the medical examiners in determining the veteran status of our veterans, if they happen to be. So we're making a comparison with their Social Security numbers through the VA and then through our medical examiner's health system. And it was actually fairly accurate. The medical examiners are able to identify that most are veterans. There were some errors, and it's probably errors on both sides. That they were a veteran and the medical examiner didn't put it on their record, or they weren't a veteran and they did. But the thing that we found out about that is the ones that they didn't, a lot of them were women. Because the medical examiner doesn't think about asking the question when it's a woman, are you a veteran? I just find that fascinating. So that bias, now it could affect the family. Because if that veteran has veteran on their medical examiner's death certificate, and there's a family behind that veteran, sometimes the family can get benefits based on the death of that veteran. But if it's not even on there, we miss a whole opportunity to support a family that might have gotten those benefits had that not been misrepresented. So these are the kinds of things that I'm always sort of advocating for, is that we have to pay attention to women veterans because of things like this. They get denied their benefits sometimes from almost no fault of anyone's on purpose, right? There's no ill intent. It's just a bias. And so I look forward to doing more research on things like that as I go forward in my educational journey.
It's just stunning. Of course, you served over 2 decades, and sounds like there's just still so much progress that needs to be made. But on the flip side, have you found any pretty remarkable strides, at least in that time?
Well, I noted just the other day, I was reading an article about how many women are joining the military these days. I feel like the gauntlet the challenge is out there based on this administration that they're like, well, if you don't think women should be in the military, we're going to join. And so that I thought was really great that women are still seeing the military as an option for them. I had a great career. I feel like I was able to utilize my skills and my discipline within the institution of the Department of Defense. I was able to make rank, and really, I think, without much bias, I made colonel. Which, in my class, I graduated from 1988 and 1985 from the Air Force Academy. Not many of us made colonel at that time. And so I feel very privileged that I was able to actually get that far. And I think nowadays, we have 4-star generals who are women. So things are very progressive, I think, as far as that. But we still have these other things that kind of keep us back that I just think people need to think about more often. And so the future looks great, I think, for women who are joining the military and who will one day be veterans. They are much more savvy than I was, and I think my class of women were. They know how to question things, and they know how to find out what they're due. And so I think they'll be in really great shape going through the military and then retiring or separating from the military. They'll be in a much better position.
Wow, that's all the more mind-boggling that these biases continue and, the supports aren't there as they should be. And lots of opportunity for women to serve. But of course, these things need to change. In terms of things that could evolve and change, could I ask you, Dr. Wright, specifically around behavioral health, can you help us with how can behavioral health innovators create effective solutions to better provide care for veterans in particular?
Yeah, so, when I talk about social determinants of health, I think about homelessness, I think about education, employment, and, the paper really talks about how these things, when they're not right for you as a person, any person, not necessarily just women, but any person, things start to fall apart, right? And so when you have substance abuse or you aren't living in a permanent home, or you can't get to the things that you need to, like healthcare, mental health care, the struggles start to compound, right? And so direct services are really important. And I've always thought that collaboration is really the key to all of that, right? We all have to work together and create a network and really a net for our veterans to ensure that they are caught in the time that, that they need us the most, and that we can provide the right resources for them so that they can get back on the path to whole health and to be able to thrive. And so I always talk to, corporations or profits about you can't really do this alone. And I think specifically in the atmosphere that we're in now, and all these grants are being taken away and things are happening, that we really have to work together to create the right synergy in order to really support our veterans. I don't want to give anybody the impression that all veterans are in trouble, because that is definitely not true. I always had sort of the 80-20 rule. 80% of us are out there working, we're going to school, we have our families, and then 20% are having some sort of struggle, whether it's financial, whether it's mental, whether it's physical, because, we have quite a few disabled veterans. And so those are the ones that we want to make sure that we're coming together to try to support. And by that, I mean, we have state agencies. Most states have a Department of Veteran Services, Veteran Affairs, which is a state entity. And then when they collaborate with the federal VA within the state, now we can get some traction on, I'm the state leader for veterans. I know where all of our veterans in the state are. Let's work with the VA to try to make the VA more aware to those veterans. Or the VA works with the state to try to help make people aware of what kinds of opportunities are available at a healthcare system from the VA. You would not believe how much stuff the VA does. It is really all-encompassing. And I always say to people, nothing's perfect. The VA is not perfect, but neither is any other healthcare system. But I do believe that the VA knows how to help veterans, right? That is key to it. They know how to talk to veterans and they know how to help veterans. And so when, we're talking about collaboration, having those entities collaborate. And then let's talk about our veteran service organizations. We have the American Legion, DAV, VFW. They're out there, they have membership, they know where their veterans are. And if they also work with the VA and their state veteran services or veteran affairs, now we can start to get things rolling to really figure out how we can support them. I think our remote areas have the most struggles. And it's a tendency, right, for our veterans who don't want to deal with a lot of people to move out to rural areas. Generally speaking, rural areas don't have the healthcare systems that they need to provide the support that they, might need as they struggle. People isolate for a reason, right? And so trying to come together to support those rural veterans by having those local veteran service organizations there to work with the VA. DAV, for instance, drives veterans to their appointments. That's a perfect collaboration. We used to have a program where during COVID, where we would utilize volunteers in some of the rural areas to drive groceries to homes of our elderly veterans. The Arizona Coalition for Military Families provided that and put peer support up there even during COVID so that we could support our older veterans who maybe couldn't get out of the house or shouldn't get out of the house just because of the virus, to support them. And that took a lot of gluing of things together, stitching, if you will, together in order to make sure that the veterans in those areas had what they need. And so I am really a proponent of good, solid collaboration between entities. It's a problem when you stovepipe and you only worry about what you're supposed to worry about in regards to your mission. You really need to break out of that cycle and start to work together if you really believe in helping veterans.
Really great examples. And it sounds like that collaboration between entities was critical for veterans to even be aware of what's available to them.
Yes. Awareness is the sticking point, right? It's very, it's difficult to get to people when you're trying to help them understand what's available to them. And when they're rural, it's even harder. We had to go to places where the map was, when you get to that telephone pole that has the big red sign on it, take 2 lefts and then another right by the statue. And my house is 2 doors down. Sometimes that's how we got to people, right? And so you have to collaborate because the local people know what's there and who's there, but sometimes the institutions need to get to them. And so the institution needs to collaborate with the local people in order to really help us save lives, right? That's really the bottom line of all of this, is to save lives. And so behavioral health-wise, we have great behavioral health companies, and at least here in Maricopa County. And I know that our VA works very closely with them to make sure that veterans who are exhibiting behavioral issues have the right place to go. Substance abuse, there's a domiciliary up in Flagstaff at the VA to support that. And so I do believe that there are collaborations happening, but there can always be more.
Right. And I love also that you brought up peer support, because like you were just mentioning, the local folks knowing and having the trust of the veterans. Similarly, I can imagine that is what brings a lot of success to peer support programs too.
It really does. You really need they need to be in the right place. So I always have to caveat that, because peer support, sometimes we can't get them to where they really need to be, for whatever reasons. It's not our area, or it's not our, it's not where we're supposed to be working. And so it's important for institutions, like I said, like the VA and the state veteran services, to make sure that there are those assets to be able to go to places like that in order to. And so I just adore the Arizona Department of Veteran Services for a lot of reasons. One, that I work there and I love working there. But the other thing is they really provide really good services. That they have a program called the Military Family Relief Fund that if you are struggling and you can't pay your bills and something has occurred, you have a disability rating and you're just struggling from, mental health, substance abuse, whatever it might be, you can make an application to get money to pay your bills while you're trying to figure out life, for a minute. I think it's up to $20,000 in a lifetime. But that was a collaboration between legislators, the office, and the veteran community to get that on the books so that there could be a tax credit and that people could donate to it in order to be able to give those direct funds to the veterans' payments. And so I think, those institutions are really, really important to make sure that the local entities have what they need. Money is important, right? Money and resources are important.
Absolutely. Money, resources, collaboration. I mean, these are complex issues and it absolutely requires that coordination. Such great examples. Director Wright, what I'm taking away from all of this really is that veterans are everywhere. And if you work in healthcare, you're definitely serving veterans, whether we realize it or not. Continuously, they're misunderstanding, biases. So could you help us a little bit with what questions should payers, providers, innovators be asking to better understand their veteran patients and developing services for them?
Yeah, so going back to sort of, not everybody believes they're a veteran. I think one of the main questions is, have you served? Because I think that sentence really resonates with people versus I'm a veteran. Some people don't believe they're veterans for, like I said, a variety of reasons, but they do know that they served, right? They do know, yeah, I was in the Army, or yeah, I was in the Air Force. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that could occur is, when you have somebody in front of you and you don't really know, is this asked, hey, did you serve? And most people are pretty, I think, upfront about that. Sure, yeah, I did 4 years in the military. And they'll tell you whether they want to continue that conversation, right? Some people deny their veteranness. They had a bad experience, something happened to them. They don't necessarily want to talk about it. So maybe my next recommendation would be let the veteran lead you to where they want to go, right? And eventually you'll get there, but at least in that instance of, sort of learning about them, let them kind of lead that conversation. And then I think, I am not a doctor, so I don't have any clinical experiences to, how to sort of approach things, but I just say, have a conversation. A lot of times it's a lot nicer if there is a veteran dealing with a veteran, if that's possible. Even bringing up my dad or mom was in the military is helpful, I think, for us veterans to say, okay, you have a little bit of experience with this. And so at least initially, I think those are a couple of things that I think I would recommend.
Simple but powerful advice that I'm excited for our audience to take away from. Really helpful. And Director Wright, if I could ask you one more question. I know you mentioned that fund. If there are any specific organizations that individuals listening can get involved with to support veterans, would you direct them anywhere?
I would. I mean, there's a lot, and depending, I feel like your audience is probably going to be from all over. So every state has a Department of Veteran Affairs. So, and most of those states have veteran homes. And anyone can volunteer in the veteran home. There are aging veterans. Usually they can no longer take care of themselves and maybe don't have anybody else to take care of them. And so they live in these great homes and they're taken care of by staff, many who often are veterans. I think at our state veteran homes, we try to have at least 20% of the staff to be veterans. And so you can volunteer. If you have a musical ability, you can go and do a little show. We've had dogs come through there, like therapy dogs. There have been just people to come visit, just to listen to their stories. Sometimes that's all they need. It's just someone to listen. And so that's one way. I also think that, fundraising is always important to our veteran service organizations. They need money to do direct services, to feed veterans if they're homeless, to send them and transport them to places, to buy food, to do all the things that people need. And so there's a number of places, U.S. Vets, for instance, that they house the homeless. It's in Maricopa County. They've just built this huge hotel to house our homeless veterans. And I think the grand opening is happening pretty soon. And so just going there to help get things cleaned up and ready for the veterans. I think they're in that process right now. So there's a lot of opportunities. If you are a veteran and you want to volunteer with veterans, you can always join a veteran service organization like VFW or American Legion or DAV. The DAV in particular transports, right? And so if you want to be a driver, that'd be great. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for civilians and veterans to volunteer to support veterans, and particularly those that might be struggling.
Really great opportunities. Thank you so much, Director Wright, for just shedding light on the current situation, especially what women veterans continue to face, but also sharing some resources for folks to get involved. And of course, thank you for your service. Such a delight having you on the Expanding Access podcast.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I hope the audience enjoys it.